The following crime stories are inspired by real events. To ensure privacy and for creative storytelling, the characters, events, and details have been modified for entertainment purposes only. These stories are not intended to represent actual persons or events. Viewer discretion is advised due to the sensitive nature of the content. In a quiet town nestled by the Colorado mountains, nothing much ever happened, or so people thought. But one spring morning, the police uncovered a crime so gruesome it shocked the entire community. At its center was a man whose secrets would unravel the lives of everyone around him, starting with his mother. She'd always been proud of her son, her only child. She raised him alone, pouring every ounce of love and strength into his upbringing. He was quiet, a little reserved, but kind, or so she believed. Growing up, he was the kind of boy you'd call shy, maybe even a little odd. He preferred books to people, and his sketches often leaned toward the macabre, skulls, shadows, and figures with hollow eyes. She dismissed it as imagination. But in hindsight, there were signs, strange drawings, a sudden anger that would flash and then vanish just as quickly, pets in the neighborhood disappearing without explanation. She had questions but never dared to ask. After all, he was her son. On a rainy April evening, everything changed. 2 officers came to her door with questions. They said her son was connected to a violent crime, a murder. At first, she didn't believe them. She couldn't. Her son wasn't capable of something like that. Was he? Her denial quickly turned to dread. They had proof, surveillance footage, eyewitnesses, even a connection between her son and the victim, a man from his book club. They arrested him that night. Desperate for answers, she began digging through her son's past. In an old box, she found notebooks filled with chilling sketches, maps, symbols, and what looked like detailed plans. Her stomach sank as she realized these weren't just drawings, they were blueprints. The victim wasn't random. He'd been a member of the same book club her son had joined months earlier. But the club wasn't just about reading. It was something darker. A secret group united by twisted philosophies and rituals. When she visited him in custody, she expected tears, maybe even an apology. What she got instead was chilling. He didn't deny it. In fact, he seemed proud. "You always knew I was different, Mom. You just didn't want to see it." His words echoed in her mind. He described the murder as though it were a game, a carefully orchestrated move in a grander plan, and he wasn't acting alone. The symbol confirmed her worst fear. Her son wasn't just involved, he was leading the group, and there were more victims, 3, maybe more. The police hadn't uncovered everything. Just as she thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. It read, "You should have stopped him. Now it's your turn." She thought she was unraveling her son's crimes, but now it seemed the danger was closing in on her. Was the message from someone in the group? Or worse, was her son still pulling strings from behind bars? In trying to understand her son's darkness, she found herself trapped in it. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered, and some sins aren't easily forgiven. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't born. They're made. In the quiet suburbs of Colorado, where the biggest drama was a misplaced trash can, no one suspected the darkness hiding behind one of these doors. But for one detective, the case that began as a missing persons report would spiral into one of the most chilling discoveries of his career. It started with a simple call, a worried co-worker reporting that a woman and her 2 young daughters hadn't shown up to work or answered their phones. It was a common enough call, but something about the voice on the other end made the detective uneasy. The house looked like every other on the block, neat, cheerful, welcoming. But as he approached the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Inside, the house was immaculate, almost too perfect. The beds were made, breakfast dishes sat in the sink, and a child's backpack rested by the door. It looked like the family had simply stepped out, but the silence was deafening. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass or overturned furniture. But then he found the woman's purse on the counter, keys, wallet, phone, all untouched. That's when the alarms in his head started screaming. The husband had rushed home from work when he heard his family was missing. He sat down with the detective, his voice steady as he recounted their last conversation. According to him, they'd had a fight the night before. She'd said she was taking the kids to a friend's house for some space, but no one had seen or heard from them since. The story sounded plausible, but the detective's instincts were screaming. There was something about the husband's eyes, calculated, rehearsed. He wasn't panicking, he was managing. The neighbor's security camera pointed directly at the house. As they watched the footage, the detective leaned closer, his heart pounding. The video showed the husband backing his truck into the driveway in the early hours of the morning, loading something into the bed, something large. Why hadn't he mentioned this? And what was he loading into the truck before dawn? The detective knew he was onto something, but he needed proof. The husband had insisted he'd gone straight to work that morning, but the GPS told a different story. It showed he'd made a detour to a remote oil field, miles from his usual route. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and the picture they painted was horrifying. They uncovered the unthinkable, evidence that shattered the facade of the perfect family and left the detective reeling. Confronted with the evidence, the security footage, the GPS logs, the grim discoveries at the oil site, the husband's story unraveled. He admitted to the argument, admitted to losing his temper, and admitted to the unthinkable. Sometimes solving the case doesn't bring closure, it only brings more questions. How could someone do this, and why? The motive was as old as time: greed, selfishness, the desire to erase one life and start another, but it didn't make it any easier to stomach. For the detective, it wasn't just a case anymore. It was a haunting reminder of how darkness can hide in plain sight. Justice was served, but for the detective, the case never truly ended. The images, the sounds, the faces, they stayed with him. He'd solved countless cases before, but this one felt personal. In the world of law enforcement, there's no time to grieve, but every case leaves a mark, and some scars never fade. Behind closed doors, even the brightest homes can harbor the darkest secrets. If you're enjoying these stories so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support motivates us to keep creating even more great content. Now back to our final story. It's been years since it happened, but I can still hear her voice, feel the cold weight of her secret pressing down on me. I was just a kid, a teenager with my own problems. I never thought I'd be part of something so evil. When she texted me that night, I didn't think much of it. We were close, like siblings really. She was the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, but lately something had changed. She wasn't herself, and that night, I found out why. She was nervous, almost paranoid. I remember joking, asking if she was running from the FBI. She didn't laugh. Instead, she said something that sent a chill down my spine. What if I told you I wanted to hurt someone? Like, really hurt them? I thought she was kidding, trying to be edgy or dramatic. But then she started talking about her mom, about how controlling she was, how she ruined her life. And then she said it. I want her gone. At first, I didn't believe her. I mean, who actually talks about killing their own mother? But the more we talked, the more I realized she wasn't joking. She had a plan, a twisted, detailed plan, and she wanted my help. She said it like she was talking about a school project. No emotion, no hesitation. I wanted to walk away, to tell someone. But part of me, some stupid, scared part, didn't want to believe it was real. That night, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I watched TV, played video games, anything to distract myself. But when my phone buzzed and I saw her name, my stomach dropped. She said it like it was nothing. It's done. Like she'd just taken out the trash. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew she wasn't lying. She acted like nothing happened, like we were back to normal. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the monster underneath. And then it hit the news. A tragic accident, they called it at first. No signs of foul play. I should have been relieved, but instead, I felt sick. She was getting away with it, and I knew the truth. She cornered me that night, told me she knew I was acting weird, and then she said something I'll never forget. If you tell anyone, you're next. I wanted to go to the police, to tell someone, anyone, but she'd thought of everything. She said she had proof, texts that made it look like I'd helped her, and I realized I was trapped. Eventually, the cracks started to show. Her story didn't add up, and the police weren't buying it. They started digging, asking questions, and then they found the one thing she hadn't planned for, a journal. She'd written everything down, the plan, her motives, even the alibis she'd rehearsed. It was enough to unravel her perfect crime. The trial was a media circus. Everyone wanted to know how a teenager could commit such a cold-blooded act. They called her a monster, a psychopath, and maybe she was. But to me, she was something worse, a friend who dragged me into her nightmare. I had to testify, to tell the truth, even if it meant admitting my own mistakes. I wasn't innocent. I'd stayed silent, ignored the signs, and now I had to live with that. She got what she deserved, life behind bars. But even now, I can't escape her shadow. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice, see that smirk, and I wonder, could I have stopped it? People say evil is obvious, that you can spot it a mile away. But the truth is, it hides. It smiles at you, shares your lunch, texts you late at night, and sometimes it calls you a friend. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like someone you thought you knew. If you loved this episode, be sure to check out our other videos. Thank you for watching. See you on our next video.